somewhat, yeah. Although yes. But however, with the following, I believe that you ought to allow amendments, because the things we're talking about here are frankly a lot more significant than closing bases. All right, but I think it's imperative that you have limitations on those amendments to be able to say, you can offer amendments, but you can't gut the bottom line. So in other words, if you don't want to reform social insurance programs as much as proposed, then how are you going to pay for it? If you don't want to raise taxes as much as what would be proposed, then what are you going to do to cut spending more? You know, I mean, because right now, here's what bipartisanship gets us today. Unfunded tax cuts, unfunded spending programs. You give me mine, I'll give you yours, we'll pass the buck to future generations. And that's what you'll get if you don't have either A, up or down vote, no amendments, which is what base closure is, although I think this is a lot more important than that. That's why you got to have the second, I think, which is you can do amendments, but they got to be bottom line neutral. And that'll provide some discipline. You got to understand, these people need a basis to say no as well. That's why you have to have statutory budget controls. When you have statutory budget controls, then when people come and say, I want this tax cut, I want this tax preference, I want this new spending program, I want this new entitlement, they have a basis to say no, because they don't like to say no. By the way, Harold, we also need political reforms. We need redistricting reform, campaign finance reform, and 12 to 18-year term limits. Yeah. And that's going to be in the book, by the way. That's not something I could have said as Comptroller General of the United States 3 years ago. Well, first, you know, we're trying to use, we have a very aggressive digital strategy planned for next year, including we're going to have a new entity that we're funding, but it's going to have journalistic independence, called the Fiscal Times. And we hired some top-flight journalists to be able to do this, where people can go to this. It's going to be an aggregator of information from the government, from think tanks, from newspapers, and other types of things, if you will. We're obviously in the film business. You know, we're in the book business. We're in the research business. So we're doing a number of things, and we're trying to get interested parties to sign up on our Citizen Action section of our website. So far, we've got close to 200,000 people that have. We want to, in 2010, we want to focus more on solutions, and we also want to focus on grass tops and grassroots, building a capability around the country. And frankly, we need professional organizations to step up to the plate. I mean, we need the CPAs, we need the actuaries, we need the financial planners. Last week, I was to about 2,500 financial planners in their national meeting out in LA, and they're going to try to figure out what they can do. Of course, in their particular case, just like CPAs, I mean, there's an economic stake here too. Because the fact of the matter is people are going to have to plan, save, invest for their future, because the government's overpromised and underdelivered. So people are going to have to assume more responsibility for their own future. They're going to need help. They're going to need help. They're going to need help in a lot of ways. And financial professionals can benefit from that. There's an opportunity too. Do I see possible hyperinflation? Inflation is going to go up after we turn the corner on the economy. The question is how much. That depends to a great extent on what the Fed does on monetary policy and what the Congress and the President do on fiscal policy. I will tell you that my pension, the main part of my pension is backed by inflation-indexed securities. That is not an investment recommendation. It's just a fact. pgpf.org. Thank you for asking. I think that our governance mechanisms, at least in the case of a number of major enterprises, did not function effectively. I do think that we probably ought to take a look at whether or not there need to be additional reforms, including, there have been reforms to require a certain number of independent directors, but you're raising a different issue. How many boards can you be on? all right, which is a very valid issue if you're going to take it seriously. I think the other issue, that we have is one of the things I talked about was you have to look at how are you doing, how are you trending, how you compare to others. You mentioned compensation. That's one of the areas where we're way out of whack. We have a closed circle. Everybody's looking at themselves. They're not looking at what our comp is like as compared to other countries. It doesn't pass a straight face test. CEO comp for many public companies does not pass a straight face test when you compare it to counterparts for major competitors of theirs in other countries around the world. The ratio of CEO pay to average worker pay is out of whack. The structure of the incentives of CEO pay doesn't necessarily properly align of creating lasting value, okay, over time. And so I think we need to make some changes, in the governance structure. And by the way, let me quickly say what the 4 common denominators are, because one of them is this, between the subprime and the federal government-owned deteriorating finances. In the subprime, the people who sold the subprime mortgages and made the fees weren't the ones who held the subprime mortgages and suffered the losses. So you had a disconnect. For the federal government, today's taxpayers benefit from low-tax, high-spend policies. Tomorrow's taxpayers will pay the price and bear the burden. Second, in the mortgage-related subprime, there was not enough transparency over these, specials, mortgage-backed securities. There wasn't enough transparency about collateralized mortgage obligations, credit default insurance. So as a result, there were a lot of big and bad surprises. Today, for the federal government, deficits are bad, debt's bad, but the real problem is the off-balance sheet obligations that are multiple times greater, that really threaten the future. They don't get enough attention. All right? Thirdly, too much debt, not enough focus on cash flow, over-reliance on credit ratings. Credit ratings for a lot of mortgage-backed securities went from AAA to junk virtually overnight. The federal government, too much debt, cash flow. We're negative cash flow on Medicare Part A. We're negative cash flow on disability income under Social Security. We're going to be negative cash flow on retirement income under Social Security next year. FDIC is having serious cash flow problems. The Airport Trust Fund, the Highway Trust Funds have serious cash flow problems. All right? And credit ratings, our ratios are comparable or in some cases worse than the UK's, and the UK's outlook for AAA credit rating was downgraded 6 months ago. They don't have 63% of the global reserve currency though, all right? And then fourth, and this is your point, a failure of private sector governance, risk management, and oversight in its functions, as well as public sector oversight, regulatory functions, to function effectively until there was a crisis at our doorstep. And then when they functioned, they did it in crisis atmosphere, without adequate due diligence, without adequate foresight, without adequate protections. All right? We wasted a lot of money, and they called it leadership. I call it laggardship. That's what we have, laggardship. Thank you very much.